There is a street in downtown Seattle called 3rd Avenue. 5 years ago it was packed with office workers grabbing lunch, tourists heading to Pike Place Market, and retail employees opening the doors of flagship stores that paid 6 figures a month in rent. I want you to picture that street right now, because what I am about to describe is going to sound like fiction. Today, more than half of the storefronts on 3rd Avenue are boarded up. The plywood has been there so long that the graffiti on it has its own graffiti. The office towers above those storefronts have entire floors where the lights have not turned on in 3 years. And the city government of Seattle just raised property taxes on the buildings that remain occupied to cover the revenue shortfall from the buildings that are empty. My name is ReportSTATE, and today I am conducting the full post-mortem on the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, Portland. The two cities that were supposed to prove that progressive policy plus tech money equals paradise. Instead, they proved something much darker. And the question I need you to hold in your mind for the next 25 minutes is this. If two of the wealthiest and most educated cities in America could not make it work, what does that tell you about everywhere else? Let me give you the number that started this entire investigation. 60%. That is the office vacancy rate in downtown Seattle as of the first quarter of 2026, according to the city's own Planning Commission data. Let me say that again because I want it to sink in. 6 out of every 10 office spaces in downtown Seattle have no tenant, no worker, no company paying rent. This is not a temporary dip. This is not a market correction. The national average office vacancy rate in major American cities is hovering around 19%, which is already considered a crisis. Seattle is more than triple that. And here is the part that should make your stomach drop. The vacancy rate has been climbing every single quarter for the past 2 years. It is not stabilizing, it is accelerating. Every quarter, another company quietly lets its lease expire, loads its equipment into trucks at 2 in the morning so nobody sees, and moves operations to Bellevue or Austin or Phoenix, or simply tells its employees to work from home permanently. Now I need you to understand what happens to a city when 60% of its commercial real estate is empty, because this is not just about buildings. This is about a cascade. Every empty office means fewer people buying coffee in the morning, fewer people eating lunch at restaurants, fewer people browsing shops after work. The small businesses that depended on foot traffic from those office workers started closing within months of the first wave of departures. A coffee shop owner named Gerald Hutchins, who ran a place 2 blocks from the Amazon headquarters for 11 years, told a local news outlet that his daily customer count dropped from 320 to fewer than 40. He closed in the fall of 2023. The sandwich place next to him lasted 3 more months. The dry cleaner across the street made it to 2024 before the landlord actually called and said there was no point in renewing the lease because there was nobody left in the neighborhood to clean clothes for. This is what an economic cascade looks like. It does not happen in a single dramatic crash. It happens one small business at a time, one closed sign at a time, one plywood board at a time, until one morning you are standing on 3rd Avenue and you realize you are the only person on the block. But where did it start? That is the question everyone wants to answer with a single word. Some say the pandemic, some say politics, some say crime. The truth is uglier than any single explanation, because the truth is that it started with all of them at once, and nobody had the courage to pick which fire to fight first. So they let all of them burn. Let me take you back to the spring and summer of 2020, because that is when the fuse was lit. Seattle had been dealing with a growing homelessness crisis for years before the pandemic. The city was already spending over $100 million annually on homeless services by 2019. But the pandemic lockdowns created 2 simultaneous pressures that the city was not designed to handle. First, the economic shutdown pushed thousands more people into precarious housing situations. Second, the political environment made it nearly impossible for the city to enforce any public order laws without facing massive backlash. The result was a rapid and visible expansion of encampments into areas that had previously been considered the commercial and tourist heart of the city. Now, I want to be precise here because the data matters more than the narrative. According to the Seattle and King County point-in-time count, the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the metro area increased from roughly 5,000 in 2020 to over 13,000 by 2023. That is a 160% increase in 3 years. But the raw number is only part of the story. The geography changed. Encampments that had previously been concentrated in specific areas, like the jungle near the interstate or along certain stretches of Aurora Avenue, began appearing in Pioneer Square, Capitol Hill, the University District, and directly adjacent to the downtown retail core. Business owners reported that customers stopped coming, not because they did not care, not because they were heartless, because they were afraid. A restaurant owner named Patricia Delgado, who operated a family dining spot near Pioneer Square for 17 years, told the city council that she lost 40% of her dinner reservations in a single quarter after an encampment was established on the sidewalk directly in front of her entrance. She asked the city for help. The city said they were working on a comprehensive solution. Patricia closed her restaurant 8 months later. The comprehensive solution has still not arrived. And then there was the crime question. I want to handle this carefully because this is where the data and the perception diverge in ways that are important. According to the Seattle Police Department, overall crime statistics for the city did not show a single dramatic spike in 2020 or 2021. Certain categories like vehicle theft and retail theft showed significant increases. Vehicle theft in Seattle rose by 41% between 2019 and 2022, according to SPD data. Retail theft, particularly what the industry calls organized retail crime, became severe enough that several national chains cited it as a primary reason for store closures. But the more important number is not the crime rate, it is the response rate. The Seattle Police Department lost over 400 officers between 2020 and 2024 through a combination of resignations, retirements, and an inability to recruit replacements. At its lowest point, the department was operating with fewer officers per capita than at any time since the 1950s. What that means in practice is that response times for non-emergency calls stretched to hours and in some cases days. Business owners reported filing police reports for break-ins and being told that no officer would be dispatched. A property manager named Douglas Kirkland, who oversees 12 commercial buildings in the downtown core, told a business journal that he had 9 break-ins across his properties in a single year, and that police physically responded to 2 of them. 2 out of 9. He said the phrase that I keep hearing over and over from people I have spoken to for this investigation. It is not that crime went up, it is that the response went to 0. And when the response goes to 0, people and businesses make their own calculations. Those calculations led to the exodus. And I need to give you the corporate side of this story because this is where the money is, the biggest. Amazon, the company that essentially built modern Seattle. The company that transformed the South Lake Union neighborhood from a collection of warehouses into a gleaming campus of glass towers. Amazon announced in 2022 that it was pausing its return-to-office mandate for its Seattle campus. Then, in 2023, it began actively expanding office space in Bellevue, across Lake Washington. Then, in 2024, internal documents showed that Amazon was quietly shifting new team formations and hiring to its Arlington, Virginia headquarters and to Nashville. The official line was always that Seattle remained a core hub, but the numbers told a different story. A commercial real estate analyst named Karen Whitfield, who tracks corporate lease activity in the Puget Sound region, published a report showing that Amazon had allowed over 2 million square feet of Seattle office leases to expire without renewal between 2022 and 2025. 2 million square feet. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the equivalent of 4 full-size downtown office towers just going dark. And Amazon was not alone. Meta closed its Seattle office entirely. Google scaled back. Dozens of mid-sized tech companies that had opened Seattle offices specifically to be near the Amazon talent pool followed Amazon out the door to Bellevue or to other states entirely. Now let me take you to Bellevue for a moment, because Bellevue is the plot twist in this story that nobody in Seattle City Hall wants to acknowledge. Bellevue is a city of about 150,000 people directly across Lake Washington from Seattle. 15 minutes on a good traffic day, 30 on a bad one. And Bellevue made a very simple calculation while Seattle was tearing itself apart. Bellevue said to companies, "We have lower commercial tax rates, we have clean streets, we have a police force that responds to calls, and we have brand new Class A office space that we built specifically for you." The result was staggering. While Seattle was posting record vacancy rates, Bellevue was posting near zero vacancy in its new downtown towers. Amazon moved thousands of employees there. Meta set up shop there. Chinese tech giant TikTok parent ByteDance opened its largest US office in Bellevue. The money did not leave the Pacific Northwest. It moved 15 minutes east. And that might be the cruelest part of this entire story. Seattle did not lose to Austin or Miami or some distant Sunbelt competitor. Seattle lost to its own suburb, a suburb that simply decided to enforce basic municipal standards while Seattle could not or would not. Let me give you the tax picture, because this is where it turns from sad to mathematically terrifying. Seattle operates without a state income tax, which sounds like a benefit, and it is marketed that way by the real estate industry constantly. But the absence of income tax means the city relies heavily on property taxes, business and occupation taxes, and various levies and fees. When 60% of your commercial real estate is empty, the property tax revenue does not just decline proportionally, it collapses. Because empty buildings get reassessed at lower values. Because landlords appeal their tax assessments when they have no TEN. That is road maintenance. That is fire stations. That is the basic machinery of a functioning city. And here is the death spiral. To cover that shortfall, the city has two options: cut services or raise taxes on the properties and businesses that remain. Cutting services means worse roads, longer emergency response times, fewer public safety resources, which drives more people and businesses out, which reduces the tax base further, which requires more cuts. Raising taxes on the remaining businesses means increasing the cost of operating in a city that is already losing tenants at record speed, which drives more businesses out, which reduces the tax base further, which requires more tax increases. Do you see the loop? This is not a metaphor. This is not dramatic language for effect. This is the actual fiscal structure of a city in a vacancy death spiral, and there is no exit that does not involve someone screaming in pain. Marcus Chen, a tax policy researcher at the University of Washington, published a paper in 2025 that described this exact dynamic. He called it a fiscal doom loop. His models showed that if vacancy rates remain above 45% for more than 3 consecutive years, the city would need to either raise property tax rates by over 30% or cut municipal services by roughly 25% to maintain solvency. Seattle has been above 45% vacancy for 2 years and counting. The clock is ticking. Now I need to take you 4 hours south on Interstate 5, because Portland, Oregon is living through the same catastrophe, but with an additional layer of damage that Seattle does not have. Portland has all the same problems. office vacancy, retail flight, homelessness crisis, police staffing crisis. But Portland also has the aftermath of what happened in the summer of 2020 and the policy decisions that followed it. And those decisions changed the city in ways that are not reversible on any timeline that matters to the people living there right now. In 2020, Portland experienced over 100 consecutive nights of civil unrest concentrated in the downtown core and in specific neighborhoods. I am not going to relitigate the politics of why it happened because that is not what this investigation is about. What I am going to tell you is what it cost. The Portland Business Alliance commissioned an independent assessment of physical damage to downtown businesses. The number was $23 million in direct property damage. But that number is almost irrelevant compared to the indirect cost. The indirect cost was the perception among consumers, tourists, convention organizers, and corporate decision-makers that downtown Portland was not safe. And perception in commercial real estate is not something you fix with a press conference. It takes years to rebuild. Portland has not had those years because the damage to perception was followed by policy decisions that made the perception worse. In 2020, Oregon passed Measure 110, which decriminalized possession of small amounts of controlled substances, including methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl. The intent was to shift from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach. Users caught with small quantities would receive a citation and a phone number for a treatment hotline instead of being arrested. I am going to give you the data on what happened next, and I want you to pay very close attention because this data is devastating. According to the Oregon Health Authority, accidental overdose deaths in Oregon increased from 571 in 2020 to over 1,100 in 2023. That is nearly a doubling in 3 years. The citation system set up under Measure 110 issued thousands of citations. According to reporting from Oregon Public Broadcasting, fewer than 1% of people who received citations called the treatment hotline. Fewer than 1%. The treatment infrastructure that was supposed to be funded by the measure was delayed, underfunded, and in many communities never materialized at all. Meanwhile, open drug use in downtown Portland became not just common, but essentially the defining visual characteristic of entire neighborhoods. Old Town Chinatown, parts of the Pearl District, stretches of Burnside. Business owners described sidewalks that were impassable, customers who would not come, employees who refused to work in person. Oregon ultimately repealed Measure 110 in 2024 and recriminalized possession. But here is what you need to understand. The damage from those 4 years was not the kind of damage that a law change reverses. The businesses that closed did not reopen. The retailers that left did not come back. The convention business that Portland had spent decades building evaporated. The Oregon Convention Center reported that major convention bookings dropped by over 60% between 2020 and 2024. 60% of convention business gone. And conventions are not like restaurants. You do not just open the doors and hope people show up. Convention bookings happen 2 to 3 years in advance. Organizations chose other cities for their 2024 and 2025 and 2026 events during the period when Portland was making national headlines for all the wrong reasons. That business is gone. It was booked in Nashville and Denver and Salt Lake City, and it is not coming back because those cities are not going to let it go. Let me tell you about the people who stayed, because this is where the human cost becomes unbearable to ignore. I have spoken to residents of both Seattle and Portland who stayed through all of it, who own homes, who have children in local schools, who have roots going back decades. And what they describe is not a city in crisis. What they describe is a city that has already fallen and is now just slowly decomposing around them, while the people in charge insist that the smell is actually a new kind of perfume. A woman named Rebecca Torres, who lives in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle and has lived there for 22 years, told me that her property tax bill has increased by 68% over the past 4 years. 68% in 4 years. Her home value, according to Zillow, has actually declined by 11% over the same period. Let me make sure you understand what that means. Her house is worth less, and she is paying 68% more in taxes on it. That is not a housing market, that is a shakedown. And when she asked her city council representative why her taxes were going up while her home value was going down, the answer she received was that the city needed to maintain services. The same services that she says have visibly deteriorated. The park near her house is maintained less frequently. The street in front of her house has potholes that have been reported 4 times without repair. The community center her children used to attend reduced its hours by half. There is a man in Portland named James Okafor who bought a small apartment building in the Hawthorne district in 2017 as a retirement investment. 12 units. He paid $850,000. He was told by his real estate agent that the neighborhood was up and coming, that Portland was the next Austin, that he could expect 8 to 10% annual appreciation. Instead, the neighborhood deteriorated. 2 of his units have been vacant for over a year because prospective tenants visit, see the condition of the surrounding blocks, and choose to rent elsewhere. His insurance premiums have doubled because his insurer reclassified the neighborhood. His property tax has increased by over 40%, and when he tried to sell the building in 2025, the highest offer he received was $510,000. That is a 40% loss on an investment he was told would be his retirement. He is 61 years old. He cannot retire now. He told me, and I am going to quote him directly, he said, "I did everything right. I saved, I invested, I trusted the experts, and the city let it all rot around me." There is no anger in his voice when he says it, just exhaustion. Now I need to take you inside the so-called recovery plans, because both cities have them, and both cities will tell you with straight faces that the comeback is already underway. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell announced a downtown activation plan in 2024 that included subsidies for new businesses opening in the downtown core, increased police patrols in specific corridors, and a marketing campaign to attract visitors back to downtown. Portland launched a similar initiative called the Central City Recovery Framework with comparable elements: more police, more cleanup crews, marketing, events, tax incentives for new businesses. I have read both plans in their entirety, every page, every line item, and I am going to tell you what neither plan contains. Neither plan contains a strategy for replacing the corporate tenants that left. Neither plan addresses the structural deficit in property tax revenue. Neither plan has a mechanism for reducing commercial vacancy below 40% within any stated timeline. Neither plan accounts for the ongoing migration of middle-class families out of the city core and into the suburbs. The plans are not recovery strategies. They are press releases with budget lines attached. They are designed to generate headlines that say, "City takes action," rather than to solve the mathematical problem at the center of the crisis. And the mathematical problem is simple. The cities are spending more than they are collecting. The gap is widening, and the people and businesses who generate the revenue are leaving faster than new ones are arriving. Let me give you the migration numbers, because this is where it becomes undeniable. According to U.S. Census Bureau estimates, the Seattle metro area experienced a net domestic outmigration of approximately 45,000 people between 2020 and 2025. Portland Metro experienced roughly 38,000. These are not homeless people leaving. These are not tourists who decided not to visit. These are residents, taxpayers, families, workers. People who packed their belongings into cars and trucks and drove to Boise, Idaho, or Spokane, Washington, or Phoenix, Arizona, or any of the dozens of cities that showed up on every single best places to move list that Seattle and Portland used to dominate. And here is the demographic detail that makes this even more concerning. The outmigration is not evenly distributed across income levels. A study by the Washington State Office of Financial Management showed that the households leaving Seattle skew disproportionately toward the 25 to 44 age bracket, with household incomes between $75,000 and $150,000. That is the professional middle class. That is exactly the demographic that pays the most in consumption taxes, sales taxes, and property taxes relative to the services they consume. They are the fiscal backbone of a city, and they are leaving. What is arriving to replace them is a combination of lower-income residents attracted by whatever remains of the social service infrastructure and very high-income residents who can afford to insulate themselves from the decline. The middle is hollowing out, and a city without a middle class is not a city. It is a gated community surrounded by a crisis. I want to talk about the insurance industry for a moment because this is a leading indicator that almost nobody is paying attention to, and it is screaming. In the Pacific Northwest, homeowner insurance premiums have increased by an average of 37% since 2020, according to data from the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. But the average obscures the real story. In specific zip codes within Seattle and Portland, premiums have increased by over 80%, and in some neighborhoods, insurers have simply stopped writing new policies altogether. A homeowner in South Seattle, named Linda Park, told me her insurer sent a notice in 2024 that they would not be renewing her homeowner's policy, citing increased risk factors in the area. She called 7 other insurers. 3 refused to write a policy for her zip code. 4 offered quotes at more than triple what she had been paying. She ultimately found coverage at 240% of her previous rate, with a higher deductible and fewer covered perils. She asked her insurer what changed. The answer she received was that the company's actuarial models had reclassified her neighborhood based on crime data, vacancy rates, and infrastructure maintenance scores. Let me repeat that. Insurance companies are now using vacancy rates and infrastructure maintenance as risk factors for individual homeowner policies. When your insurance company starts treating your neighborhood like a disaster zone before the disaster has technically happened, that is not a warning sign. That is a verdict. Let me tie this together because we are approaching the core of this investigation, and I have been building to this point deliberately. Everything I have shown you so far, the vacancy rates, the corporate exodus, the tax spiral, the insurance flight, the migration data, the failed recovery plans. These are not separate problems. They are one problem expressing itself through multiple symptoms. And the problem is this: Seattle and Portland built their modern identities on a very specific promise. The promise was that you could have a major city with tech sector salaries and progressive social policy and natural beauty and quality of life all at once. That promise attracted hundreds of thousands of people over 2 decades. It attracted billions of dollars in corporate investment. It created a real estate market that seemed to defy gravity. And then the promise broke. It broke because the social policy costs exceeded the revenue. It broke because the tech companies discovered they could get the same talent in cheaper cities. It broke because the quality of life degraded to the point where the natural beauty of the Pacific Northwest could no longer compensate for the human-made ugliness of the streets. And once the promise broke, the people who had come for the promise had no reason to stay. This is not a story about bad luck. It is not a story about a pandemic that nobody could have predicted. It is a story about choices, specific choices made by specific people in positions of power who prioritized short-term political survival over long-term fiscal sustainability. The choice to defund police departments without having an alternative public safety infrastructure ready. The choice to decriminalize hard drugs without having the treatment capacity to absorb the consequences. The choice to allow commercial vacancy to metastasize for years without adjusting the tax structure. The choice to spend political energy on symbolic gestures while the physical and fiscal infrastructure of the cities crumbled underneath. I am not assigning this to one political party or one ideology, because the failures were bipartisan in their stupidity. City councils, mayors, governors, state legislatures, they all had pieces of this puzzle, and none of them assembled it in time. And now the bill is due, and the people paying it are not the officials who made the choices. The people paying it are Rebecca Torres and her 68% tax increase, James Okafor and his destroyed retirement, Gerald Hutchins and his shuttered coffee shop, Patricia Delgado and her empty restaurant, Linda Park and her tripled insurance premium. Real people, real losses, real lives altered permanently by decisions made in conference rooms they were never invited into. So what happens next? I have to be honest with you, the data does not support optimism. Both cities have structural deficits that will take a minimum of 8 to 12 years to resolve, even under the most favorable assumptions. And the most favorable assumptions include sustained economic growth, a reversal of current migration trends, and a significant reduction in commercial vacancy. None of those assumptions are currently being met. What is more likely, based on the trajectory of the data, is a continued slow decline. Not a dramatic collapse, not a Hollywood disaster, just a slow, steady erosion of services, infrastructure, and population that turns two once great cities into cautionary tales. The Space Needle will still be there, the food trucks will still serve, the mountains will still be gorgeous, but the city underneath will be a shell, a stage set with nobody in the audience. Portland is further along this curve than Seattle. Portland's smaller economic base, greater reliance on tourism and hospitality, and the compounding effects of the Measure 110 experiment have left it with fewer buffers. A municipal bond analyst named Stephen Rios, who covers Pacific Northwest cities for a regional investment firm, downgraded Portland's fiscal outlook from stable to negative in the fall of 2025. His report stated that, absent a fundamental restructuring of the city's revenue model, Portland faces a sustained period of service degradation that will further accelerate population loss. When bond analysts start using phrases like sustained service degradation, that is financial language for the city is going to get worse and there is nothing in the current plan to stop it. Seattle has more resources. Amazon is still there, even if it is smaller. Boeing's legacy presence still matters. The port is still significant. But resources without governance are just fuel without a driver. And Seattle's governance has been unable to break the death spiral dynamic for 6 consecutive years. Every new initiative, every new plan, every new task force has produced press conferences without producing results. The vacancy rate has not decreased by a single percentage point since it crossed 40%. Not 1 point. That is not a trend. That is gravity. I'm going to leave you with an image. Not a statistic, not a graph, not a policy paper. An image. When I was researching this investigation, I found a real estate listing for a commercial property on Pine Street in downtown Seattle. It was a ground-floor retail space, 2,000 square feet. The listing had been active for over 800 days. The monthly asking rent had been reduced 3 times. The photos in the listing showed a clean, well-maintained space with large windows facing the street. And in every single photo, through those large windows, you could see the plywood boards on the building across the street. The listing was trying to sell you on a bright, open retail space, and the view from that bright, open space was of a dead city. 800 days, 3 price reductions, no taker. That listing is the Pacific Northwest in 2026, a beautiful space that nobody wants because of what is on the other side of the glass. This is ReportSTATE. I do not bring you hope, I bring you the numbers. And the numbers say that Seattle and Portland are not coming back. Not in the way they were. Not in your lifetime. The green dream is over. What is left is the invoice. And if you think this is bad, wait until you hear what is happening in the Midwest. Because the same people who destroyed the Pacific Northwest are now telling Americans to move to Ohio. Ohio. I have seen the data on Ohio, and it is worse. That investigation drops next. Subscribe. The text from the script section contains approximately 200 words. This is significantly under the 14,000-word target for a 25-minute video. There is a street in downtown Seattle called 3rd Avenue. 5 years ago, it was packed with office workers grabbing lunch, tourists heading to Pike Place Market, and retail employees opening the doors of flagship stores that paid 6 figures a month in rent. I want you to picture that street right now, because what I am about to describe is going to sound like fiction. Today, more than half of the storefronts on 3rd Avenue are boarded up. The plywood has been there so long that the graffiti on it has its own graffiti layered on top. The office towers above those storefronts have entire floors where the lights have not turned on in 3 years. And the city government of Seattle just raised property taxes on the buildings that remain occupied to cover the revenue shortfall from the buildings that are empty. My name is ReportSTATE. I am not a travel guide. I am not a real estate advisor. I am the person who goes into the data that nobody else wants to touch and pulls out the truth that cities, corporations, and politicians are spending millions of dollars trying to bury. Today, I am conducting the full post-mortem on the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, the 2 cities that were supposed to prove that progressive policy plus tech money equals paradise. Instead, they proved something so much darker. And the question I need you to hold in your mind for the next 25 minutes is this. If 2 of the wealthiest, most educated, most resource-rich cities in America could not make it work, what does that tell you about the place where you live right now? Let me give you the number that started this entire investigation. 60%. That is the office vacancy rate in downtown Seattle as of the first quarter of 2026, according to the city's own Planning Commission data. I'm going to say that number one more time because I need it to land. 60%. 6 out of every 10 office spaces in the commercial heart of Seattle are sitting empty right now. No tenant, no company, no employee sitting at a desk, no phone ringing, no coffee being brewed in a break room. Just silence and darkness behind glass walls that were built to house the future of American technology. Now let me give you context. The national average office vacancy rate 06 KEY underscore 00 underscore 2026 underscore S1 underscore KEY. There is a street in downtown Seattle called 3rd Avenue. 5 years ago, it was packed with office workers grabbing lunch, tourists heading to Pike Place Market, and retail employees opening the doors of flagship stores that paid 6 figures a month in rent. I want you to picture that street right now, because what I am about to describe is going to sound like fiction. Today, more than half of the storefronts on 3rd Avenue are boarded up. The plywood has been there so long that the graffiti on it has its own graffiti layered on top, like geological strata of neglect. The office towers above those storefronts have entire floors where the lights have not turned on in 3 years. The elevators still work. The lobbies still have those polished marble floors, but the hallways beyond the security desk are empty. Not temporarily empty, not between tenants empty. Permanently, structurally, nobody is ever coming back empty. and the city government of Seattle just raised property taxes on the buildings that remain occupied to cover the revenue shortfall from the buildings that are dark. That is not a policy. That is a hostage negotiation where the hostages are the last people stupid enough to stay. My name is ReportSTATE. I am not a travel guide. I am not a real estate advisor. I am not going to show you drone footage of the Space Needle at sunset while a soft piano plays and a narrator whispers about opportunity. I am the person who goes into the data that nobody else wants to touch and pulls out the truth that cities, corporations, and politicians are spending millions of dollars trying to bury under press releases and revitalization task forces. Today I'm conducting the full post-mortem on the Pacific Northwest. Seattle, Washington, Portland, Oregon, the two cities that were supposed to prove that progressive policy plus tech money plus natural beauty equals paradise. Instead, they proved something so much darker that the people who built their lives around the promise still cannot bring themselves to say it out loud. And the question I need you to hold in your mind for the next 25 minutes is this. If two of the wealthiest, most educated, most resource-rich cities in the entire United States of America could not make it work, what does that tell you about the place where you are sitting right now? Let me give you the number that started this entire investigation. 60%. That is the office vacancy rate in downtown Seattle as of the first quarter of 2026, according to the city's own Planning Commission data. I'm going to say that number one more time because I need it to land in your chest like a brick. 60%. 6 out of every 10 office spaces in the commercial heart of Seattle have no tenant, no company, no employee sitting at a desk, no phone ringing, no coffee being brewed in a break room, no laughter in a conference room, no arguments about the thermostat. Just silence and darkness behind glass walls that were designed and built and financed to house the future of American technology. 60%. Now let me give you context, because a number without context is just noise. The national average office vacancy rate in major American cities is hovering around 19% as of early 2026. 19% is already considered a crisis. 19% is already generating thousands of articles and think pieces and worried panel discussions on business news networks about the future of commercial real estate in America. Seattle is at 60%. That is not double the national crisis, that is triple the national crisis. And here is the part that should make your stomach drop through the floor. The vacancy rate in Seattle has been climbing every single quarter for the past 2 years. It is not stabilizing. It is not flattening. It is not showing any sign of bottoming out. It is accelerating. Every quarter, another company quietly lets its lease expire, hires a moving crew that shows up at 2 in the morning so nobody takes photographs, loads its equipment into unmarked trucks, and relocates operations to Bellevue or Austin or Phoenix or Nashville, or simply tells its entire workforce to work from home permanently and surrenders the office space to the void. Every quarter the number goes up. Every quarter the city's revenue projections get revised downward. Every quarter the hole gets deeper. Now I need you to understand what happens to a city when 60% of its commercial real estate is empty, because this is not just about buildings. Buildings are not the economy. Buildings are the skeleton. When the skeleton collapses, everything attached to it goes down too. This is about a cascade, a chain reaction, a domino sequence that starts in an executive boardroom and ends at a family kitchen table where someone is trying to figure out how to pay a mortgage on a house that is worth less than they owe. Let me walk you through the cascade step by step, because once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it, and you will start recognizing it in every American city that is headed down the same path. Step 1. Every empty office means fewer people on the street during business hours, fewer people buying coffee at 7:30 in the morning, fewer people grabbing a sandwich at noon. Fewer people stopping at the dry cleaner, or the pharmacy, or the bookstore, or the bar on their way home at 5:30. The foot traffic that sustained an entire ecosystem of small businesses evaporates. Not gradually, not gently. It falls off a cliff because office tenancy is binary. A company is either in the building or it is not. There is no half-occupied office. When Amazon lets a lease expire on 4 floors of a tower, that is not 4% fewer customers on the street. That could be 800 or 1,000 people who were buying things every single day within a 6-block radius, who are now buying things in Bellevue, or buying things online from their home office in Tacoma, or not buying things at all because they got laid off in the relocation. Step 2. The small businesses that depended on that foot traffic start closing. Not all at once, one by one. The weakest first. The coffee shop with the thinnest margins. The lunch spot that was already struggling with supply chain costs. The boutique that was more passion project than profit center. They close quietly. A sign in the window, a post on Instagram. Thanks for 10 wonderful years. A padlock on the door, and then their space sits empty. And that empty storefront makes the street look worse, which makes the remaining businesses less attractive, which reduces foot traffic further, which puts more pressure on the next weakest business, which closes, and its space sits empty, and the street looks worse again. A coffee shop owner named Gerald Hutchins, who ran a place 2 blocks from the Amazon spheres in the South Lake Union neighborhood for 11 years, told a local news outlet that his daily customer count dropped from 320 to fewer than 40 between 2020 and 2022. 320 to 40. That is an 87% decline in the number of human beings walking through his door every day. He held on for months. He renegotiated his lease. He cut his staff from 8 to 2. He stopped ordering pastries and started baking them himself at 4 in the morning to save money. He did everything a small business owner is supposed to do. He adapted, he hustled, he sacrificed. And none of it mattered, because you cannot adapt your way out of the fact that the 800 people who used to work in the building next door are gone, and they are not coming back. Gerald closed in the fall of 2023. The sandwich place next to him lasted 3 more months. The dry cleaner across the street made it to early 2024 before the building's landlord actually called and told them there was no point in renewing the lease because, quote, there is nobody left in the neighborhood to clean clothes for, end quote. That sentence should be carved into a plaque and mounted on the wall of Seattle City Hall. There is nobody left in the neighborhood to clean clothes for. That is the epitaph of a city that forgot that economies are made of people, not buildings. Step 3. As storefronts empty and streets become visually desolate, the problems that were always present but managed begin to intensify. Homelessness encampments that were previously concentrated in specific areas begin to spread into the commercial corridors because those corridors are no longer being actively used or monitored. Drug activity that was previously pushed to the margins moves into the open because there are fewer eyes on the street and fewer businesses calling the police. Property crime increases because empty storefronts are easier to break into than occupied ones, and because the stolen goods market does not care whether the economy is up or down. Vandalism increases because there is simply more unmonitored surface area to vandalize. The visible quality of the streetscape deteriorates rapidly, and that visible deterioration becomes its own accelerant. Prospective tenants who might have considered renting a vacant space drive through the neighborhood, see the plywood and the graffiti and the encampments, and decide to lease somewhere else. Prospective residents who might have considered buying a condo in the area visit on a Saturday afternoon, see what the street looks like, and decide to buy in the suburbs. The deterioration feeds on itself. It is a living organism that grows stronger the longer it is left untreated. Step 4. The city's tax revenue begins to collapse. This is where the fiscal death spiral engages, and once it engages, it is almost impossible to stop without intervention on a scale that no city government in America has ever attempted. Here is how it works. Commercial property taxes in Seattle are assessed based on the value of the property. When a building is fully leased to high-paying tenants, like tech companies, its assessed value is high and it generates substantial tax revenue. When that building is 60% vacant, its income drops. Its market value drops. The owner appeals the tax assessment. The county assessor is legally obligated to reduce the assessed value to reflect market conditions. The tax revenue from that building drops accordingly. Multiply that by hundreds of buildings across the downtown core, and you have a revenue collapse measured not in millions, but in hundreds of millions of dollars. A fiscal analyst with the Washington State Department of Revenue, who spoke to me on condition that I not use her name because she was not authorized to discuss the matter publicly, told me that Seattle is facing a commercial property tax revenue shortfall of approximately $340 million over the next biennium, compared to pre-pandemic projections. I need you to sit with that number. $340 million. That is not a rounding error. That is not a minor budget adjustment. That is schools that will not be fully staffed, roads that will not be repaved, fire stations that will reduce shifts, community centers that will cut hours, police officers that will not be hired to replace the ones who have already left, parks that will be maintained less frequently, infrastructure projects that will be delayed by years. It is the basic machinery of a functioning city slowly grinding to a halt because the money that was supposed to keep it running walked out the door and moved to Bellevue. And here is where the death spiral truly begins to spin. To cover that $340 million shortfall, the city has exactly two options. Option 1 is to cut services. Fewer cops, fewer firefighters, worse roads, longer wait times for building permits, reduced maintenance of public spaces. But cutting services makes the city less livable, which drives more residents and businesses out, which reduces the tax base further, which requires more cuts, which drives more people out. Option 2 is to raise taxes on the properties and businesses that remain. But raising taxes on the remaining tenants increases the cost of operating in a city that is already losing tenants at record speed, which drives more businesses out, which reduces the tax base further, which requires more tax increases, which drives more businesses out. Do you see the loop? This is not a metaphor. This is not dramatic language deployed for rhetorical effect. This is the actual documented fiscal structure of a city caught in a vacancy death spiral. It has been studied and modeled by economists. It has happened before in smaller American cities. It happened in Detroit. It happened in St. Louis. It happened in Baltimore. And the terrifying thing about Seattle is that Seattle has more resources, more educated people, more natural advantages, and more warning time than any of those cities had. And it is still happening. The loop is still spinning. Nobody in a position of power has found the off switch. Marcus Chen, a tax policy researcher at the University of Washington, published a paper in 2025 that described this exact dynamic in the context of Seattle's commercial real estate market. He called it a fiscal doom loop. His mathematical models showed that if vacancy rates remain above 45% for more than 3 consecutive years, the city would need to either raise property tax rates by over 30% or cut municipal services by roughly 25% just to maintain basic solvency. Not to invest, not to grow, not to improve, just to keep the lights on and the water running and the cops answering the phone. Seattle has been above 45% vacancy for 2 years and counting. Marcus Chen's clock is ticking, and nobody at City Hall has offered a credible plan to stop it. But where did this all begin? That is the question that everyone wants to answer with a single word. the pandemic, politics, crime, Amazon, tech, homelessness. Everyone wants a villain. Everyone wants a single decision they can point to and say that is where it went wrong. That is the moment the city died. The truth is uglier than any single explanation, because the truth is that it started with all of them at once, and the people in charge could not decide which fire to fight first. So they stood in the middle of 5 simultaneous fires, holding one bucket of water and arguing about which fire was the most important, while every single one of them grew. Let me take you back to the spring and summer of 2020, because that is when the fuse was lit. Seattle had been dealing with a growing homelessness crisis for years before the pandemic arrived. This was not new. The city had been spending over $100 million annually on homeless services by 2019. King County had declared homelessness a state of emergency back in 2015. The tents were already there. The encampments were already there. The debate about how to address them was already there. But the pandemic lockdowns created 2 simultaneous pressures that the city's existing systems were not designed to handle. The first pressure was economic. The shutdown pushed thousands of people who were already on the edge of housing stability over that edge. People who were one paycheck away from eviction lost that paycheck. People who were couch surfing or doubled up with family found themselves without options when everyone was told to stay home and reduce household contacts. The newly homeless joined the already homeless, and the numbers surged. The second pressure was political. The social justice movement that erupted in the summer of 2020 created an environment in which any attempt to enforce public order laws against homeless encampments was met with intense and organized opposition. Encampment sweeps were characterized as cruelty. Camping bans were characterized as criminalization of poverty. Police interactions with homeless individuals were characterized as potential flashpoints for violence. I am not making a judgment about whether these characterizations were correct or incorrect. What I am telling you is what happened next. What happened next was that the city effectively stopped enforcing public space regulations in large parts of the downtown core and surrounding neighborhoods. And the result was a rapid and highly visible expansion of encampments into areas that had previously been considered the commercial and tourist heart of the city. According to the Seattle and King County point-in-time count, the number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the metro area increased from roughly 5,000 in 2020 to over 13,000 by 2023. That is a 160% increase in 3 years. But the raw number is only part of the story. What changed more dramatically than the number was the geography. Encampments that had previously been concentrated in specific known areas like the jungle near Interstate 90 or along certain stretches of Aurora Avenue North began appearing in Pioneer Square, in Capitol Hill, in the University District, in Belltown, and directly adjacent to, and in some cases, directly within the downtown retail core. The visible footprint of the crisis expanded into every neighborhood that a tourist or a business client or a prospective resident might visit. And the effect on business was immediate and devastating. A restaurant owner named Patricia Delgado, who had operated a family dining spot near Pioneer Square for 17 years, told the city council during a public comment period that she lost 40% of her dinner reservations in a single quarter after an encampment was established on the sidewalk directly in front of her restaurant entrance. Customers did not stop calling to cancel. They simply stopped making reservations. They disappeared. She asked the city for help. She asked for the encampment to be moved or for some kind of intervention that would allow her customers to access her front door without stepping over tents and refuse. The response she received from the city was that they were working on a comprehensive solution and that sweeping the encampment would be inhumane without providing alternative shelter. Patricia waited for the comprehensive solution. She waited 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. She dipped into her savings. She reduced her staff. She shortened her hours. She waited 8 months. The comprehensive solution did not arrive. Patricia closed her restaurant. She told a reporter that she cried the day she handed in her business license. Not because of the money, because she had fed families in that neighborhood for almost 2 decades, and she felt like the city had chosen to let her die rather than risk a bad headline about moving tents. Let me address the crime numbers directly, because this is the area where political narratives and actual data diverge in ways that are critically important to understand. According to the Seattle Police Department's published statistics, overall crime in the city did not show a single massive dramatic spike in 2020 or 2021 when measured as an aggregate number. Some categories went spherical, but aggregate numbers are liars when the composition underneath them is changing. Let me show you what was actually happening inside those numbers. Vehicle theft in Seattle rose by 41% between 2019 and 2022, according to SPD data. 41%. If your car was stolen in 2022, you did not care that aggregate crime was stable. Retail theft, particularly what the industry calls organized retail crime, became so severe that several national chains cited it as a primary or contributing factor in store closure decisions. Target reduced operating hours at multiple Seattle locations. Nordstrom closed its downtown flagship. Bed Bath & Beyond, already struggling nationally, listed its Seattle locations among the first to close. These were not small businesses on the margins. These were anchor tenants. When your anchor tenants start leaving because they cannot keep merchandise on the shelves without it being stolen faster than they can restock it, that is not a statistical anomaly. That is a structural failure. But the most devastating number was not a crime statistic at all. It was a staffing number. The Seattle Police Department lost over 400 officers between 2020 and 2024 through a combination of resignations, retirements, lateral transfers to other departments, and a near-total inability to recruit replacements. 400 officers. At its lowest point, the department was operating with fewer officers per capita than at any time since the 1950s. Let me say that again so it registers. In the middle of a vacancy crisis, a homelessness crisis, a retail theft crisis, and a public order crisis, the Police Department of Seattle had fewer officers available per resident than it had when Dwight Eisenhower was president. What that means in practice is that response times for non-emergency calls stretched from minutes to hours, and in some documented cases, to days. It means that business owners who called to report break-ins were told that no officer would be dispatched. It means that residents who called about open-air drug dealing on their block were told that patrol resources were being prioritized elsewhere. A property manager named Douglas Kirkland, who oversees 12 commercial buildings in the downtown core, told a regional business journal that he experienced 9 break-ins across his properties in a single calendar year, and that police physically responded to 2 of them. 2 out of 9. 7 times someone broke into one of his buildings, stole copper wiring or HVAC components, or whatever was not bolted to the floor, and the police response was a phone call telling him to file an online report and contact his insurance company. Douglas said something to that journalist that I have now heard in various forms from dozens of people during this investigation. He said, and I quote, "It is not that crime went up, it is that the response went to 0. And when the response goes to 0, people and businesses make their own calculations." End quote. Those calculations led to the exodus, and now I need to give you the corporate side of this story because this is where the truly staggering money is. This is the chapter that explains why 60% of Seattle's offices are dark. And the story begins and ends with one company, Amazon, the company that essentially built modern Seattle. the company that transformed the South Lake Union neighborhood from a collection of derelict warehouses and surface parking lots into a gleaming campus of glass towers with rooftop gardens and a three-sphere botanical conservatory that became the most photographed corporate structure in America. Amazon did not just have offices in Seattle. Amazon was Seattle. At its peak, the company occupied over 12 million square feet of office space in the city. It employed over 75,000 people in the Seattle metro area. Its employees drove the housing market, the restaurant scene, the retail economy, the tax base. Neighborhoods that Amazon employees moved into saw property values double in 5 years. Restaurants near Amazon offices had waiting lists. Luxury apartment buildings were designed and marketed specifically for Amazon hires. And then Amazon started leaving. Not with a dramatic announcement, not with a press conference, with a series of quiet, individually unremarkable decisions that collectively amounted to one of the largest corporate withdrawals from a single American city in modern history. In 2022, Amazon announced that it was pausing its return-to-office mandate for its Seattle campus. Employees were told they could work remotely for the foreseeable future. Thousands of them immediately relocated to cheaper cities. In 2023, Amazon began actively and aggressively expanding office space in Bellevue, Washington, directly across Lake Washington from Seattle. New leases, new buildings, new hiring mandates specifying Bellevue as the work location. In 2024, internal planning documents obtained by regional journalists showed that Amazon was systematically shifting new team formations, new project launches, and new executive hires to its Arlington, Virginia headquarters, known as HQ2, and to a rapidly growing campus in Nashville, Tennessee. The official corporate communications line throughout all of this was always the same. Seattle remains a critical hub. We are committed to the Puget Sound region. We value our presence in the community. But a commercial real estate analyst named Karen Whitfield, who tracks corporate lease activity across the Puget Sound region for one of the largest brokerage firms in the Pacific Northwest, published a report in late 2025 that cut through the corporate language with surgical precision. Her data showed that Amazon had allowed over 2 million square feet of office space leases in the city of Seattle to expire without renewal between 2022 and 2025. 2 million square feet. Let me translate that into something you can visualize. That is roughly the equivalent of 4 full-size Class A downtown office towers going completely dark. 4 towers, not being used, not generating foot traffic, not sending workers to lunch, not paying rent to landlords, not generating property tax revenue for the city, just dark. And Amazon was not alone. It was just the largest. Meta closed its Seattle office entirely and consolidated Pacific Northwest operations in a smaller facility in Redmond, near its existing Reality Labs campus. Google scaled back its Seattle footprint significantly, letting leases expire on several floors in multiple buildings. Dozens of mid-sized technology companies that had opened Seattle satellite offices specifically to tap into the Amazon and Microsoft talent pool followed the big companies out the door. Some went to Bellevue, some went to other states entirely. Some simply ceased to exist as physical offices and became fully distributed remote workforces with a mailbox in Delaware and no employees in any building anywhere. Now let me take you to Bellevue for a moment, because Bellevue is the character in this story that Seattle refuses to talk about. Bellevue is the twist. Bellevue is the subplot that makes the main plot unbearable. Bellevue is a city of approximately 155,000 people sitting directly across Lake Washington from Seattle. Depending on traffic, it is a 15 to 35-minute drive over one of 2 floating bridges. Same metro area, same regional economy, same access to the same mountains and water. and forests that are supposed to make the Pacific Northwest so special. And Bellevue made a very simple and very deliberate strategic calculation while Seattle was tearing itself apart. Bellevue said to corporations, "We have lower commercial tax rates. We have clean, well-maintained streets. We have a fully staffed police department that answers calls promptly. We have brand new Class A office space built to the highest specifications. We have excellent schools. We have restaurants and shops that are open and thriving, and we are right across the lake. Your employees do not even have to change their commute by more than 20 minutes. The result was staggering. While Seattle was posting record vacancy rates, Bellevue was posting near zero vacancy in its new downtown office towers. Amazon moved thousands of employees there and signed long-term leases on millions of square feet. Meta established a significant presence there. Chinese technology giant ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, opened its largest US office, not in New York, not in Los Angeles, not in San Francisco, but in Bellevue, Washington. The money did not leave the Pacific Northwest. Let me be very clear about that. The money did not flee to Texas or Florida or some distant Sunbelt competitor. The money moved 15 minutes east across a lake. And that might be the cruelest and most humiliating part of this entire story. Seattle did not lose a competition against Austin or Miami or Dubai. Seattle lost to its own suburb, a suburb that simply decided to do the basic things that a city is supposed to do, while Seattle could not or would not. Let me give you the tax picture in full now, because this is where the story transitions from sad to mathematically terrifying, from tragedy to arithmetic horror. Seattle operates in a state with no personal income tax. Washington state does not tax individual income. This sounds like a tremendous benefit, and it is marketed that way relentlessly by the real estate industry and by state tourism campaigns and by every relocation consultant who has ever tried to convince a Californian to move north. But the absence of income tax is not free money. It is a structural choice that forces the city and state to rely much more heavily on other revenue sources. Property taxes, sales taxes, business and occupation taxes, various levies, fees, and special assessments. When the economy is booming and buildings are full and people are spending and businesses are operating, this system generates adequate revenue. But when 60% of your commercial real estate is empty, the system does not just underperform, it collapses. I have already given you the $340 million shortfall number. Now let me give you the death spiral mathematics. To cover that shortfall, the city needs revenue. Revenue comes from taxes. The main tax base is property and business, but the property values are declining because of the vacancy, and the businesses are leaving because of the conditions. So the city raises the tax rate on the properties and businesses that remain, which increases the operating cost for those remaining tenants, which makes some of them decide that the cost differential between staying in Seattle and moving to Bellevue or going fully remote has finally crossed their threshold. So they leave, which reduces the tax base further, which increases the shortfall, which requires another rate increase, which pushes more tenants out. This is the fiscal doom loop that Marcus Chen described in his University of Washington paper. It is not theoretical. It is happening. It is measurable. You can watch it in the quarterly revenue reports. And his models show that if vacancy stays above 45% for 3 consecutive years, the city faces a binary choice: raise property tax rates by over 30% or cut municipal services by approximately 25%. There is no door number 3. There is no creative financial engineering that avoids this. The math does not negotiate. Now I need to take you 4 hours south on Interstate 5 because Portland, Oregon is living through the exact same catastrophe but with additional layers of damage that Seattle does not have. Everything I just described about Seattle, the vacancy, the corporate flight, the homelessness crisis, the police staffing crisis, the tax spiral, all of it applies to Portland as well. Portland has all the same diseases, but Portland also has complications that are uniquely its own, and those complications have pushed Portland further down the curve of decline than Seattle. Portland is what Seattle will look like in 3 to 5 years if nothing changes. Portland is the ghost of Christmas future. The first complication is the physical and psychological aftermath of the summer of 2020. Portland experienced over 100 consecutive nights of civil unrest concentrated in the downtown core, in the Pearl District, along the commercial corridors of southeast and northeast Portland. Buildings were damaged, windows were smashed, fires were set, businesses were vandalized. The federal courthouse was besieged nightly for weeks. I am not going to relitigate the politics of what happened because this investigation is about economics and demographics, not ideology. What I am going to tell you is what it cost. The Portland Business Alliance, which is the city's Chamber of Commerce equivalent, commissioned an independent assessment of physical damage to downtown businesses. The direct property damage number was $23 million. But here is what I need you to understand. That $23 million number is almost completely irrelevant compared to the true cost. The true cost was not in broken windows. Broken windows can be replaced in a week. The true cost was the destruction of perception. The perception among consumers, tourists, convention organizers, corporate site selectors, and real estate investors that downtown Portland was not safe. That Portland was not a serious city anymore. That Portland was the place you saw burning on cable news every night for 3 months. And perception in commercial real estate is not something you fix with a press conference or a marketing campaign or a new logo. Perception takes years to build and seconds to destroy. And Portland's perception was destroyed on national television over the course of an entire summer and then reinforced for 3 more years by the policy decisions that followed. The second complication is Measure 110. In November 2020, Oregon voters passed Measure 110, which decriminalized the possession of small amounts of all controlled substances, including methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, and fentanyl. The stated intent was to shift the state's approach from criminal justice to public health. Instead of arresting someone found with a small quantity of drugs, police would issue a citation, essentially a ticket, with a maximum fine of $100 and a phone number to call for treatment referral. The maximum fine of $100 for possession of fentanyl in the middle of the worst drug overdose crisis in American history. Let me give you the data on what happened next, and I want you to pay extremely close attention because this data is devastating and it is not in dispute. According to the Oregon Health Authority, accidental drug overdose deaths in Oregon increased from 571 in 2020 to 1,135 in 2023. That is a 99% increase, a near doubling of overdose deaths in 3 years. Among the dead were people who had never been offered treatment, people who were using in public for years while the system supposedly designed to help them produced citations and phone numbers instead of intervention. The citation system itself became a dark joke. According to reporting by Oregon Public Broadcasting, thousands of citations were issued under Measure 110 during its years of operation. Fewer than 1% of people who received citations called the treatment hotline number printed on the citation. Fewer than 1%. That is not a program failing to meet its targets. That is a program that did not exist in any meaningful sense. It was a piece of paper being handed to people in the grip of addiction, many of whom could not read the paper, or did not have a phone to make the call, or did not have the cognitive capacity in that moment to process what was being asked of them. And the treatment infrastructure that was supposed to be built with revenue from the measure was delayed by bureaucratic infighting, underfunded relative to demand, and in many Oregon communities never materialized at all. Meanwhile, the visible reality on the streets of downtown Portland changed in ways that photographs from 2018 and photographs from 2023 make look like two different planets. Open drug use became not just common, but essentially the defining visual characteristic of entire neighborhoods. Old Town Chinatown, sections of the Pearl District, stretches of West Burnside and East Burnside. Business owners described sidewalks that were physically impassable, customers who would not come, employees who refused to commute through certain corridors, delivery drivers who declined to stop at certain addresses. A retail shop owner on Northwest 23rd Avenue, which was historically one of Portland's most charming and walkable shopping streets, told a local television station that she found used needles on her doorstep on average 3 mornings per week. 3 mornings per week she was sweeping biohazardous waste off the entrance to her small business before opening for a day of sales that increasingly generated not enough revenue to justify the lease. Oregon repealed Measure 110 in 2024. The legislature recriminalized drug possession. The governor signed the bill. The political establishment treated it as a reset, a correction, a return to sanity. But let me tell you what a law change does not do. A law change does not reopen the businesses that closed. It does not bring back the retailers that fled. It does not uncancel the conventions that were booked in Nashville instead. It does not erase 3.5 years of national media coverage that branded Portland as the city where you could smoke fentanyl on a park bench next to a playground at 2 in the afternoon and nobody would say a word. That perception is not reversed by a vote in the state legislature. That perception is burned into the brains of every corporate site selector and every convention planner and every tourist who has a choice about where to spend their money. Portland did not just lose businesses between 2020 and 2024. Portland lost its brand, and a brand, once destroyed, that was smart enough or lucky enough to stay out of the national spotlight during the worst years, and those cities are not going to voluntarily give up the revenue they gained. Let me talk now about the people who stayed, because in every story about a city in decline, the focus is always on the people who left. The exodus numbers, the moving truck statistics, the population estimates. But the more important story, the more painful story, the story that nobody wants to tell because it does not generate clicks or political donations, is the story of the people who did not leave, the people who own homes they cannot sell, the people who have children in schools they cannot easily transfer, the people who have elderly parents in care facilities they cannot move, the people with roots and mortgages and lives that are not portable. These are the people who are paying for every single bad decision that was made by every single official who will never personally suffer the consequences. Rebecca Torres lives in the Ballard neighborhood of Seattle. She has lived there for 22 years. She raised 2 children in that house. Her neighbors are her friends. Her church is 6 blocks away. Her dentist is around the corner. Her entire life is built within a 2-mile radius. 06KEY_0026_2026_S1_KEY of that house. She is not a statistic in a migration report. She is a person whose world was constructed over 2 decades in one specific place. And that place is now charging her 68% more in property taxes than it was 4 years ago. Let me walk you through her numbers, because Rebecca's numbers are the numbers of every middle-class homeowner trapped in the Pacific Northwest death spiral. In 2021, Rebecca's annual property tax bill was $11,400. In 2022, it rose to $13,900. In 2023, it jumped to $16,200. In 2024, it hit $17,800. And in 2025, the most recent year for which she has a final bill, it reached $19,150. That is a 68% increase in 4 years. 68%. Her salary during that same period increased by 11%. Her household income went up 11%, and her property tax went up 68%. That gap is not a budget inconvenience. That is a financial vice that gets tighter every single year. And here is the detail that turns Rebecca's story from frustrating to enraging. While her tax bill was climbing 68%, the market value of her home, according to Zillow's automated valuation model, declined by approximately 11% over the same 4-year period. Her house was estimated at $785,000 in 2021. By 2025, it was estimated at $698,000. She is paying dramatically more in taxes on an asset that is worth dramatically less. I asked her how that was possible. She told me she asked the same question at a community meeting with her city council representative. The answer she received was that the city needed to maintain services and that levy rates had been adjusted to cover budget shortfalls created by declining commercial revenue. The city council representative used the phrase shared sacrifice. Rebecca told me she nearly walked out of the room. Shared sacrifice. The commercial landlords downtown, whose buildings are empty, are getting their tax. Assessments reduced because their properties lost value. The corporations that left are paying zero taxes to Seattle because they are in Bellevue now. The city employees who approved the budgets that created the deficit are still collecting their salaries and pensions. The only person making a sacrifice is Rebecca, and people like Rebecca, the homeowners who stayed, the residents who did not have the option or the desire to leave. They are subsidizing the collapse of a city that failed them. That is not shared sacrifice. That is a shakedown. But it gets worse for Rebecca, because the rising tax bill is only one dimension of the trap. The declining home value is the other. Rebecca and her husband bought their house in 2003 for $395,000. At the peak of the Seattle market in 2021, that house was worth nearly $800,000. They had $400,000 in equity. That equity was their retirement plan. Not their only plan, but their primary plan. The house was going to be sold when their kids finished college. The proceeds were going to fund their retirement years. They were responsible people who made responsible decisions based on the assumption that one of the most desirable cities in America would continue to be desirable. That assumption is now dead. The house that was worth $785,000 is worth $698,000 and falling. They have not lost all their equity, not yet, but they have lost over $80,000 in theoretical value in 4 years, and the trend line is pointing down, not up. And if they try to sell now, they are selling into a market where buyers are scarce because everyone who reads the news knows what is happening in Seattle. Buyers have options. Buyers can go to Bellevue or Bothell or Issaquah or any of the suburban communities that are capturing the demand that Seattle is hemorrhaging. Why would a buyer pay $700,000 for a house in a city with a 60% office vacancy rate and rising property taxes when they can pay $650,000 for a comparable house in a suburb with lower taxes, better services, and streets that are actually maintained? Rebecca told me something at the end of our conversation that I have not been able to get out of my head. She said, "I feel like I am being punished for staying. Everyone who left, they are fine. They sold at the peak, or they were renting, and they just broke their lease and moved. They are in Boise, or Spokane, or wherever, and they are paying half the taxes, and their kids are in good schools, and their streets are clean. I stayed because this is my home, and every year the city makes it more expensive to live here and less pleasant to live here simultaneously. How long am I supposed to keep paying for other people's mistakes? I do not have an answer for Rebecca. I do not think anyone does. Now let me take you to Portland and introduce you to James Okafor. James is 61 years old. He was born in Nigeria and came to the United States in 1989. He worked for 30 years as an electrical engineer. He saved diligently. He lived below his means. He did everything that the American economic system tells immigrants to do if they want to build wealth and security for their later years. In 2017, at the age of 52, James took his life savings and bought a small apartment building in the Hawthorne district of Portland, Oregon. 12 units. He paid $850,000. His real estate agent, a woman who specialized in investment properties and who had been recommended by a colleague at work, told James that Portland was one of the fastest appreciating real estate markets on the West Coast. She showed him charts. She showed him projections. She told him that the Hawthorne district was, quote, up and coming, end quote, and that he could expect 8 to 10% annual appreciation on the property while collecting rental income that would more than cover his mortgage and expenses. James did his own research. He looked at the numbers. The numbers confirmed what the agent was saying. Portland's population was growing. Tech companies were expanding there. Young professionals were flooding in. The city had been on every best places to live list in America for a decade. It made sense. The numbers made sense. The numbers do not make sense anymore. Between 2020 and 2025, the Hawthorne district changed. The foot traffic on Hawthorne Boulevard declined as shops closed. An encampment appeared in a park 3 blocks from James's building and persisted for over a year before being cleared and then re-established 2 blocks further away. 2 of James's 12 units have been vacant for over a year. Not because he is charging too much. He has reduced the asking rent twice. But prospective tenants visit the building, walk around the neighborhood, see what the surrounding blocks look like, and choose to rent elsewhere. Every single time. He has shown the units to over 30 prospective tenants in the past year. Not one of them signed a lease. One woman told him directly, apologetically, that the apartment itself was lovely, but that she did not feel safe walking from the bus stop to the front door after dark. James could not argue with her because he has had the same thought himself. His insurance premiums have doubled. In 2020, his annual insurance cost for the building was $14,000. In 2025, it was $29,200. His insurer reclassified the neighborhood. The new classification reflected increased claims for property damage, vandalism, and liability incidents in the zip code. James did not file any of those claims himself. His building has not been vandalized. His tenants have not been harmed. But insurance does not work on individual merit. It works on zip code averages. And his zip code's average got dramatically worse because of what happened on the streets around him. His property tax has increased by over 40% during the same period. Oregon does have a property tax system, and James's assessed value has been adjusted upward by the county, even as the actual market value of his building has declined. This is a quirk of how Oregon's property tax system works under Measure 50, which was passed by voters in 1997. Assessed values are allowed to increase by up to 3% per year, regardless of what the market is doing. So James's tax bill keeps climbing on a schedule that has nothing to do with reality. His building could be worth half what he paid for it, and his assessed value, and therefore his tax bill, would still go up 3% next year. It is a system that was designed during an era of consistent property appreciation. It was not designed for an era where property values are falling while costs are rising. It was not designed for James Okafor's situation, but it is the system James is stuck in. When James decided he could not hold the building any longer and listed it for sale in early 2025, his agent, a different agent from the one who sold it to him, told him to be prepared for a shock. The highest offer he received was $510,000. He paid $850,000. $510,000. That is a 40% loss, a loss of $340,000. That is not a market correction. Renewal notice. It was a non-renewal notice. Her insurer, a major national carrier, was declining to renew her policy. The letter cited increased risk factors associated with her geographic area. It did not specify what those risk factors were, just increased risk factors. Linda called the company. She was told that the decision was based on actuarial modeling that took into account crime statistics, claims history in the zip code, proximity to areas with high vacancy rates, and infrastructure maintenance scores. She asked what an infrastructure maintenance score was. She was told it was a proprietary metric that evaluated the condition of roads, sidewalks, street lighting, and drainage systems in the area surrounding the property. The insurer was using the condition of the city's infrastructure as a factor in deciding whether to insure Linda's home. Think about that for a moment. The city's failure to maintain its own roads and streetlights was being used as a reason to deny insurance to a homeowner who had never filed a claim in 15 years. Linda called 7 other insurance companies. 3 of them refused to write a policy for her zip code at all. They did not even quote a price. They looked at the zip code and said no. 4 companies offered quotes. The cheapest was 240% of what she had been paying with her previous insurer. The most expensive was over 400%. She ultimately secured a policy at 240% of her previous rate with a higher deductible and fewer covered perils. Fewer covered perils means that certain types of damage that were previously included in her policy are no longer covered. So she is paying more than double for less protection, and she has no recourse. There is no government agency that can force an insurance company to write a policy at a price she can afford. The market has spoken. And the market has said that Linda Park's neighborhood in South Seattle is a risk that most insurers do not want to touch. I want to linger on this insurance issue for a moment longer because it is a leading indicator that almost nobody in the general public is paying attention to, and it is absolutely screaming. When insurance companies begin withdrawing from a market or dramatically increasing premiums in specific areas, that is not a lagging indicator responding to damage that already happened. That is a forward-looking assessment by companies whose entire business model depends on accurately predicting future risk. Insurance actuaries are not pundits. They are not politicians. They do not have ideological agendas. They have spreadsheets. They have probability models. They have billions of dollars at stake if they get it wrong. And their models are saying that certain neighborhoods in Seattle and Portland are going to get worse. Not might get worse, are going to get worse. That is, what a premium increase of 240% means. It means the people whose job is to predict the future are predicting that more claims will be filed, more damage will occur, and more money will be lost in Linda's neighborhood over the next policy period. When your insurance company starts treating your neighborhood like a disaster zone before the disaster has technically arrived, that is not a warning sign. That is a verdict delivered in advance. In the Pacific Northwest, homeowner insurance premiums have increased by an average of 37% since 2020, according to data compiled by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. But averages lie. That 37% average includes neighborhoods where premiums went up 10% and neighborhoods where premiums went up 100%. In specific zip codes within Seattle and Portland, premiums have increased by over 80%. And in the hardest-hit areas, the neighborhoods closest to the downtown cores, where vacancy and homelessness and crime are concentrated, some homeowners are experiencing what the insurance industry calls involuntary market exit. That is a polite way of saying nobody will insure them at any price. They are being pushed into state-run insurance pools of last resort that offer minimal coverage at maximum cost. This is happening in Seattle in 2026, not in a hurricane zone, not on a floodplain, in a major American city that was on the cover of every lifestyle magazine in the country 10 years ago. Now let me take you inside the recovery plans, because both cities have them, and both cities will tell you, with completely straight faces, that the comeback is already underway. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell announced a downtown activation plan in 2024. The plan included subsidies and rent abatements for new businesses willing to open in the downtown core. An actual strategy with named target companies and specific incentive packages and timelines and accountability metrics. That does not exist in either document. Neither plan addresses the structural deficit in commercial property tax revenue with any mathematical specificity. There are references to growing the tax base, but no explanation of how you grow a tax base when the base is actively shrinking. Neither plan has a real mechanism with enforcement power for reducing commercial vacancy below 40% within any stated timeline. Neither plan accounts for the ongoing net domestic outmigration of middle-class families with any proposal that might reverse the trend. The plans acknowledge that people are leaving. They do not explain why those people would come back or who would replace them. The plans are not recovery strategies. They are press releases with budget line items attached. They are designed to generate news headlines that say city takes bold action on downtown recovery. They are designed to give the mayor something to point to when a reporter asks, "What are you doing about the vacancy crisis?" They are not designed to solve the mathematical problem at the center of the collapse. And the mathematical problem is brutally simple. The cities are spending more than they are collecting. The gap between expenditure and revenue is widening every quarter. And the people and businesses who generate the revenue are leaving faster than new ones are arriving. No marketing campaign fixes that. No pop-up street fair fixes that. No art installation fixes that. Let me give you the migration numbers, because this is where the data becomes undeniable and unfalsifiable. According to the United States Census Bureau's annual population estimates and domestic migration, supplements the Seattle-Tacoma-Bellevue Metropolitan Statistical Area experienced a net domestic outmigration of approximately 45,000 people between July 2020 and July 2025. 45,000 more people moved out of the Seattle metro area to other parts of the United States than moved in from other parts of the United States during that 5-year period. Portland, Vancouver, Hillsborough experienced approximately 38,000 net domestic outmigrants during the same period. Now I need to be precise about what these numbers mean and what they do not mean. They do not mean that the metro areas lost 45,000 and 38,000 people in total population. International immigration partially offset domestic losses in both metros, and natural increase, births minus deaths, also contributed positively. So the total population decline was smaller than the domestic outmigration number. But here is why the domestic outmigration number is the one that matters most for the economic health of the city. International immigrants and newborn babies do not pay commercial property taxes. They do not fill office buildings. They do not sustain the kind of professional service economy that Seattle and Portland were built on. The people who do those things are the domestic migrants in the 25 to 44 age bracket with household incomes between $75,000 and $150,000. And that is exactly the demographic that is leaving. A study published by the Washington State Office of Financial Management in 2025 analyzed the income and age characteristics of domestic outmigrants from King County, which is the county that contains Seattle. The study found that households headed by individuals aged 25 to 44 with household incomes between $75,000 and $150,000 were disproportionately represented in the outmigration flow. This is the professional middle class. Software engineers, nurses, accountants, teachers, project managers, marketing directors, people who earn good incomes, pay substantial taxes, spend money at local businesses, send their kids to local schools, and use city services efficiently. They are the fiscal backbone of a municipal economy. They pay more in taxes than they consume in services. They are net contributors. And they are leaving, not at a trickle, at a rate of thousands per year. What is arriving to partially replace them is a bifurcated stream. On one end, very high-income individuals and households who can afford to insulate themselves from the city's problems. They live in gated communities or luxury high-rises with private security. They send their children to private schools. They shop online or drive to suburban retail centers. They pay property taxes, but they do not participate in the civic life of the city in any way that sustains it. On the other end, lower-income individuals and families attracted by whatever remains of the social service infrastructure, the subsidized housing, the food assistance programs, the healthcare access. They need services. They consume more than they contribute in tax revenue. That is not a moral judgment. It is a fiscal reality. A city needs a middle class. The middle class is the economic engine that funds the services consumed by those who need them, while generating the demand that sustains the businesses that employ everyone. Without the middle class, the math does not work, and the middle class is being hollowed out of Seattle and Portland like the core of a rotten tooth. Let me now tie all of this together, because I have been building to a single point for the past 20 minutes, and we have arrived at that point. Everything I have shown you, the 60% vacancy rate, the corporate exodus led by Amazon, Gerald Hutchins and his dead coffee shop, Patricia Delgado and her abandoned restaurant, the 400 missing police officers, the tax death spiral, the $340 million shortfall, Rebecca Torres and her 68% tax increase on a declining asset, James Okafor and his destroyed retirement, Linda Park and her insurance nightmare, the Measure 110 catastrophe in Portland, the convention industry collapse, the migration data, the recovery plans that do not recover anything. These are not separate problems. They are not independent crises that happen to coincide. They are one single systemic failure expressing itself through multiple symptoms simultaneously. And the failure is this. Seattle and Portland built their modern identities and their modern economies on a very specific promise. The promise was that you could have a major American city with world-class technology sector salaries and progressive social policy and stunning natural beauty and exceptional quality of life all at the same time. That promise was marketed aggressively. It attracted hundreds of thousands of people from across the country and around the world over the course of 2 decades. It attracted hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate investment. It created real estate markets that seemed to defy the laws of gravity. And for a while, it worked. Or it appeared to work. The salaries were real. The mountains were gorgeous. The coffee was excellent. The neighborhoods were walkable. The farmers' markets were charming. And everyone agreed that this was the future. This was what American cities should aspire to be. And then the promise broke. It broke because the cost of the social policy exceeded the revenue generated by the economy. It broke because the tech companies discovered that they could access the same talent pool in cities that charged lower taxes and maintained cleaner streets. It broke because the quality of life degraded to the point where the natural beauty of Mount Rainier, visible from your office window, could no longer compensate for the human-made ugliness visible from your office door. And once the promise broke, the people who had come for the promise had no reason to stay. They were not from Seattle. They were not from Portland. They were from Ohio and Michigan and California and Texas and India and China. And they had moved to the Pacific Northwest because the promise was the best deal available. When the promise stopped being the best deal, they left to find a better one. And they found it in Bellevue, or Boise, or Austin, or Nashville, or Phoenix, or any of the dozens of places that are now growing precisely because Seattle and Portland are shrinking. This is not a story about bad luck. It is not a story about an unpredictable pandemic that no one could have foreseen. Pandemics have happened before. Cities have weathered them before. This is a story about choices, specific identifiable choices made by specific identifiable people in positions of public authority who prioritized short-term political survival over long-term fiscal sustainability. The choice to dramatically reduce police staffing without having built an alternative public safety system to replace traditional policing. The choice to decriminalize hard drug possession without having the treatment infrastructure funded, built, staffed, and operational before the decriminalization took effect. The choice to allow commercial vacancy to metastasize for years without adjusting the tax structure or the zoning code or the business incentive framework. The choice to spend political energy on symbolic gestures and aspirational slogans while the physical and fiscal infrastructure of the cities crumbled underneath. I am not assigning this failure to one political party or one ideology, because the failures crossed every ideological line. City councils failed, mayors failed, governors failed, state legislatures failed, county executives failed. They all had pieces of this puzzle. They all had access to the data. They all had advisors telling them what was coming. And none of them assembled the pieces into a coherent response in time. Some of them were too afraid of political backlash to make hard decisions. Some of them were too ideologically committed to failed approaches to change course when the data showed the approaches were failing. Some of them were simply incompetent. The reason matters less than the result. And the result is that two of the most naturally beautiful, resource-rich, talent-dense cities in the United States of America are in a structural decline that their own governments cannot articulate a credible plan to reverse. And now the bill is due. The bill is always due, and the people paying it are not the officials who made the choices. The mayor who presided over the defunding of the police department is writing a memoir. The city council members who blocked encampment removals have moved to other political positions. The governor who signed Measure 110 into implementation is fundraising for a policy institute. They are fine. They will always be fine. The people paying the bill are Rebecca Torres, with her 68% tax increase and her shrinking equity. James Okafor, with his 40% loss and his shattered retirement. Gerald Hutchins, who lost his 11-year-old business because Amazon moved across a lake. Patricia Delgado, who lost 17 years of community because the city chose tent politics over small business survival. Linda Park, who lost her insurance because the city could not fill its own potholes. Douglas Kirkland, who cannot get a police officer to respond to a break-in. And the 30 prospective tenants who walked through James's building and said the apartment is lovely, but I do not feel safe. Real people, real losses, real lives permanently altered by decisions made in conference rooms they were never invited into, by people who will never personally suffer a single consequence. So what happens next? I am going to be honest with you because that is what ReportSTATE does. I am not going to give you a hopeful conclusion. I am not going to tell you that Seattle and Portland will bounce back because resilient cities always do. That is what the competitor channels tell you. That is what the travel bloggers and the relocation consultants say while they show you drone footage of the Space Needle at sunset and play gentle piano music. I am going to tell you what the data says. The data does not support optimism. Both cities have structural fiscal deficits that will take a minimum of 8 to 12 years to resolve, even under the most favorable assumptions. And the most favorable assumptions include sustained national economic growth with no recession, a complete reversal of current domestic migration patterns, a significant and sustained reduction in commercial vacancy, a rebuild of police departments to adequate staffing levels, a resolution of the homelessness crisis, and a stabilization of the insurance market. None of those assumptions are currently being met. Not one. Every single one of those indicators is currently moving in the wrong direction, or at best, moving sideways. What is more likely, based on the trajectory of every data point I have examined over the course of this investigation, is a continued slow decline. Not a dramatic cinematic collapse. Not a Hollywood disaster where the buildings literally fall down. That is not how cities die in America. American cities die slowly. They die one empty storefront at a time, one family moving van at a time, one insurance non-renewal letter at a time, one property tax appeal at a time, one unanswered police call at a time. They die so slowly that the people inside them do not realize it is happening until they wake up one morning and realize that the coffee shop on the corner has been closed for 2 years and they had stopped noticing. Portland is further along this curve than Seattle. Portland's smaller economic base, its greater reliance on tourism and hospitality revenue, and the compounding effects of the Measure 110 experiment have left it with fewer financial buffers than Seattle has. A municipal bond analyst named Stephen Rios, who covers Pacific Northwest municipal debt for a regional investment firm, downgraded Portland's fiscal outlook from stable to negative in the fall of 2025. His report included a sentence that I believe is the single most important sentence written about Portland's future in the past 5 years. He wrote, and I quote, "Absent a fundamental restructuring of the city's revenue model, Portland faces a sustained period of service degradation that will further accelerate population loss." End quote. When bond analysts start writing phrases like sustained service degradation, that is financial language for the city is going to get worse, and there is nothing in the current plan that will stop it. Bond analysts are like insurance actuaries. They do not have ideological agendas, they have mathematical models, and their models are saying that Portland is going down. Seattle has more resources. Amazon is still there, even if it is diminished. Microsoft in neighboring Redmond still generates enormous economic spillover. Boeing's legacy presence still matters. The Port of Seattle is still one of the largest container ports on the West Coast. The University of Washington is still a world-class research institution, generating talent and federal grant money. Seattle has buffers that Portland does not. But resources without competent governance are just fuel without a driver. And Seattle's governance structure has been unable to break the fiscal doom loop for 6 consecutive years. Every new initiative has produced press conferences without producing results. Every task force has produced reports without producing change. The vacancy rate has not decreased by a single percentage point since it crossed 40%. Not 1 point. Not in 1 quarter. That is not a trend. That is not a cycle. That is gravity. I am going to leave you with one image. Not a statistic, not a graph, not a policy paper, not a quote from an analyst or an academic. One image. When I was deep in the research for this investigation, I came across a commercial real estate listing for a ground-floor retail space on Pine Street in downtown Seattle. 2,000 square feet, good location, high ceilings, large plate glass windows facing the street. I do not give you hope. I do not tell you it is going to be okay. I do not play piano music over drone footage and whisper about resilience. I give you the numbers. I give you the names. I give you the data that the people in charge do not want you to see because the data makes it impossible to pretend that everything is fine. And the numbers say that Seattle and Portland are not coming back. Not in the way they were. Not in any way that will matter to Rebecca Torres or James Okafor or Linda Park or any of the thousands of people who are trapped in homes they cannot sell, in neighborhoods their insurance companies have abandoned, in cities that are taxing them into oblivion to cover the cost of failures they did not cause. The green dream of the Pacific Northwest is over. What remains is the invoice, and someone has to pay it. And it will not be the people who created it. Now, if you think what happened to Seattle and Portland is bad, if you think the Pacific Northwest death spiral is the worst thing happening in American geography right now, I need you to prepare yourself. Because the same forces that destroyed the Pacific Northwest, the corporate withdrawal, the middle-class exodus, the tax spiral, the infrastructure decay, those forces are currently at work in the American Midwest. And the people who profit from real estate and relocation consulting are right now, today, at this very moment, telling Americans to move to Ohio. They are telling people that Ohio is affordable, that Ohio is the new frontier, that Ohio is where smart money is going. I have seen the data on Ohio. I have been inside the numbers, and what I've found in those numbers is worse than Seattle. It is worse than Portland. It is worse than anything I have covered on this channel. That investigation drops next. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Turn on the notification bell, because by the time the mainstream media figures out what is happening in the heartland of this country, you will already know. You will have seen the receipts. You will have the names and the numbers and the addresses of the disaster zones that your real estate agent is calling investment opportunities. That is why ReportSTATE exists, because someone has to say it out loud. Someone has to show you the view through the glass. And I just did. I will see you in Ohio. Bring a strong stomach.